That was then. This is now. Day 5. I wouldn't talk about what had happened to anyone but Kathy and Mark. The next few weeks it seemed as if I was moving in slow motion, while other people were speeded up. Mom came home from the hospital, and I flunked chemistry, and Angela got married to some creep friend of her brother's. I called Kathy every day. Mark was the one who explained everything to the police. The police were very impressed with Charlie's having saved our lives and all that. They were local cops who had known and liked him anyway. They told us we could have his car. I took it because I figured he would have given it to us if he had had the time. I guess I was acting pretty strange during those weeks because one day Mark said, "Look it, man. Charlie knew what kind of people came into his bar. Why do you think he kept a shotgun handy? He knew those cowboys had a gun. He knew what kind of chance he was taking. He told us to be careful," I said. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Charlie's warning us about hustling. He didn't have to try to get us off the hook. "Mark, can't you see? This ain't some story, some TV show. Bang, you're dead, big deal. This is the real thing. Charlie is dead. He was all set for life. He wasn't going to get drafted. He had his business. He was all set. And then we blew it for him." "We didn't blow nothing, Brian. Things happen. That's all there is to it." "Not things like that," I said. Mark didn't understand, and Kathy did. I started spending more and more time with Kathy. Since I had the car, we went for a lot of drives and got a lot of cokes together. We were always talking to each other about the way we felt. I tried telling her how I felt about Charlie, about how shook the whole thing had me. She told me about herself, about how she wanted to go to college more than anything, about how she worried about Eminem, and about life in a big family, something I wasn't familiar with. She was so smart, yet she didn't know a lot of things. She was one of the few really innocent chicks I had ever run into, but I could talk to her about anything, talk to her better than I could anyone, even Mark. After a few weeks, we'd drive by the park and make out for a while. It was different for me, though, because I had quit thinking only about myself, quit pushing for all I could get. Mark was acting strange these days, too. He would stare at me for long periods of time when he thought I wasn't watching, like he was trying to find the old Brian in this stranger, like he was trying to figure out who I was. One night he even almost lost his temper with me when I told him I was going goofing around with Kathy instead of with him. It was as if he felt something slipping and was trying to hang on. I couldn't help him. I was trying to hang on myself. He even acted like he was jealous of Kathy. In all the years I'd known him, in all the years I'd gone with different girls, he had never acted like that. I was changing, and he wasn't. Chapter 6. The Texans were finally caught and tried. I had to go to trial to testify. Mark did too. He watched me closely at first. I guess he couldn't forget that by the time the police had showed up at Charlie's, I had been hysterical. He didn't have to worry. I went through the whole trial, calm, collected, numb, and empty. I felt like a tape recorder playing back something it had impersonally recorded. The Texans were sentenced to life after a trial that didn't last as long as I thought it would. I guess because there wasn't any defense. I didn't feel glad or vengeful or anything. I really hadn't much cared whether or not they even caught those guys. Charlie was dead. Nothing was going to change that. I tried to figure out what made me so shook up about it. I knew people died, although I still can't see me doing it. My father had died, so I knew that people close to you died the same as strangers did. I guess I just couldn't see standing there, alive, talking, thinking, breathing, being, 1 second and dead the next. It really bothered me. Death by violence isn't the same as dying any other way, accident or disease or old age. It just ain't the same. That winter, Mark and me were kind of celebrities because of our involvement in the trial. We were invited to social parties, and we were stared at in the halls, and even the teachers treated us differently. I just put up with it. Mark kind of enjoyed it. He felt bad about Charlie being dead, though, enough to shut up people who tried to get him to talk about it. Mark and me used to go down to the bar and just sit on the curb across the street and stare at the boarded-up windows. Just sit and stare and not say anything. It's funny how you don't think about people until after they're dead or gone. Mom had to stay in bed for a month, so we were really getting hard up for money. I got to thinking about what Charlie had said when I asked him for a job. I decided I needed a haircut, clean clothes, and a really big change in attitude. I told you that I don't like authority. This gives people the impression that I'm a smart-aleck kid. I'll admit it. I'll admit I'm pretty mouthy. I got to thinking, who's going to hire a mouthy kid who acts like he already knows it all? Even if you do know it all, Mark said one evening while we were sitting on the porch, you don't have to let them know it. Very good idea, I granted him. We were getting along better lately. He had given up trying to keep us together the same as we used to be. I know now this must have been a struggle, Wrenching off from Mark couldn't affect me so much. I was all wrapped up in Kathy. He was on his own. I didn't know how he spent his time when I was with Kathy, and I didn't bother to find out. When you go so far as to get a haircut and iron a shirt, I'll know you're serious. We're really hard up, ain't we, Brian? Yep. Or hasn't the shortage of food bugged you at all? I don't eat like some people. I'm going to start bringing in some money. You wait and see, buddy. I ain't gonna sponge forever. This was the first time in all the years that he had lived with us that Mark ever said anything about being dependent on us. I looked at him quickly, and I wanted to say, "What do you mean, Sponge? We love you and we want you here. And Mark, you're my brother and you've got a right to whatever I've got." I didn't. I said, "Don't be a dingling." Now I wish I'd told him how much he meant to us, to me and Mom, how he made us seem more like a family. But I've never been able to say things like that, to tell people I loved them, unless it was some nitwit chick I couldn't care less about. So I just gave him a punch on the shoulder. He grinned at me, but absently, like he was thinking of something else. That night, Kathy and I went for a drive. I wanted to tell her about my new approach to getting a job, but before I could, she said suddenly, "I think Eminem is smoking marijuana." She sounded worried. I was puzzled. "So what?" She gave me an incredulous look. "So what? Have you smoked it?" "Yeah," I said. "You haven't?" "No. It ain't much. I'd rather have beer any day. I think a lot of these kids just dig it because it's in. It's against the law and it's supposed to be cool. Me, I think it's okay. But it sure ain't worth 5 years in a state prison." "You won't smoke it anymore?" It was a request, not an order, so I answered. I said I wasn't nuts about it. Kathy still seemed concerned. "Did you like it? Did it make you want to try stronger stuff? Like acid?" "Nope, can't say that it did. But maybe it affects some people like that. At least that's what I read in the magazines." Kathy sat back with a sigh. "But it's different with you, Brian. You're smart enough to enjoy yourself without artificial stimulants." I didn't say anything to this, as I never turned down compliments. She continued, "But Eminem, he's so trusting. If he's running around with people who give him grass, he'll take it. If someone handed him LSD and said, 'This is groovy,' he'd say, 'Okay,' and take it. I worry because before Eminem always seemed so happy at home. He never seemed to need anything else. But lately, he's gotten so much grief for his hair and some of his ideas. Wish Daddy would leave him alone. Eminem isn't happy at home now, so he goes other places. I don't know where. I don't even know his friends anymore." "You love him a lot, don't you?" I said vaguely, jealous, feeling a mild form of whatever it was that Mark felt about Kathy. "Sure, don't you?" Kathy said, amazed at the possibility that someone might not love simple, brilliant, trusting Eminem. "Yeah," I said, because at the moment I loved anything that Kathy loved, because I loved her. I did. I thought it was corny. Love is always corny to anyone not experiencing it himself. And even now, to me, it was corny. But I couldn't help it. I thought about all the times I had said I love you to girls I didn't love, to some I didn't even like. And it had been so easy. And now I couldn't even look at her for fear she could tell somehow. It was really weird. "I think you'd be a good influence on him," Kathy was saying. And I realized I hadn't heard a thing she'd been saying. "I know what," she continued. "Let's pick up him and Mark and go get a Coke over on the Ribbon." "Okay," I said. The last thing I wanted, just then, was to be alone with her. I could easily say something really dumb. We picked up Mark pretty quick. He was walking home from Terry Jones's house. We had to hunt and hunt for Eminem, but we finally found him in the bowling alley. The Ribbon was a 2-mile stretch of hot dog and hamburger stands, drive-ins, and supermarkets over on the west side, close to where the Socias lived. At night, the parking lots were filled with kids sitting on their cars and waving, watching and yelling at other kids driving by. You could drive up and down the street looking at people and park your car and look at people. The cops sometimes came along and told everyone to get back into their cars, but the cops were mostly guys who had been patrolling the Ribbon for a long time. The kids had worn them down by being pleasantly smart-aleck and smilingly uncooperative. So unless the kids were openly smoking grass or fighting, the cops were content to sit on the cars with them and yell rude things to chicks driving by. It was a great place to go to pick up chicks. If you followed a carload of them around for a while, they might pull over and exchange phone numbers with you. Everyone in town went there to see who was going with who and who had what car. If you found someone you wanted to drive around with, you parked your car and left it while you goofed around with maybe a dozen different people in one night. Just the driving up and down was a blast. There had been all kinds of editorials in the paper about it because a lot of pushers took advantage of the filled parking lots, and quite a bit of grass and money exchanged hands there, but mostly it was harmless. Fights down on the Ribbon had really died off in the last year. It had gotten pretty safe except for drag racing, which caused a wreck or two a week. "Boy, I hope I see someone I know," Kathy said. Here, here I sit surrounded by beautiful boys. She gave me a teasing grin. Mark raised his eyebrows. Well, if you feel that way about it, he put his arm across her shoulders. We were sitting pretty close together because all four of us were in the front seat. Kathy was next to me, Mark on her other side, and M was hanging out the window, gravely watching people, waving as he was waved to, yelling back if he was yelled at, always slightly surprised at the crudity of the calls, as if he hadn't heard the same things 100,000 times before. Put one arm across Kathy's shoulders, too. She beamed. It's so nice to feel wanted. A couple of blondes and an orange Camaro came by on Eminem's side of the car and made him an indecent proposition. I thought that kid was going to fall out the window. He was so shocked. The rest of us laughed. The ribbon was a two-lane street with an extra lane at the traffic lights for left turns. When we stopped at the light, we were in the middle lane, with cars on both sides of us. The blonde chicks in the orange Camaro were on our right, and they were still talking to Eminem. I didn't catch much of the conversation, but Mark did, and he was talking to them too, trying to see around Eminem, who took up a lot of the window. On our left was a green out-of-sight Corvette with a couple guys in it, waiting for a left turn signal. They looked like real snobs. You can tell just by looking that some guys are snobs, especially the ones with Corvettes. The one on the passenger side glanced over at us and, I still don't understand why, popped off with a really obscene remark. I sat stunned for a minute. The thought of Kathy's hearing such a thing just froze me. Then, so quick I didn't even realize what was happening. Mark reached past Eminem, opened the door, pushed Eminem out of the way, ran around to my side of the car, and punched the foul-mouthed guy in the nose, literally smashing his nose in. It was their turn to be stunned. Before they could move, Mark was back in the car. He jumped into the back seat and yelled, "Take off!" The lights had turned green, so I stepped hard on the accelerator. The Corvette was supposed to turn left, and all the cars behind it were honking, so they turned left. I thought maybe they'd come after us. They were older guys, maybe 18 years old, but they didn't. We drove up and down the ribbon without seeing them again. "You're a fast worker," Kathy said. I wondered if she was mad at me because I hadn't been the one to punch that guy. She was my girlfriend. I should have done it. I was halfway hacked off at Mark for showing me up. "Well," Mark said in a mock serious voice hanging over the front seat, "I get these impulses." "Impulses to jump out of cars and hit people?" Kathy said dryly, and I realized she didn't think Mark was a hero for what he'd done. As a matter of fact, she didn't think too much of it. "They hit us first," Mark said, sitting back in the seat. "A hit don't have to be physical. I couldn't hit them the way they hit us without hitting you, too." I had always known that, in spite of his lousy grades, Mark was every bit as smart as I was, but it was still surprising whenever he proved it to me. Kathy was quiet. Then she turned around and looked at Mark for a long time. "I never know what to make of you, Mark. Why make anything of anybody? Why not just take people or leave them?" Mark was in a funny mood. I could tell. I had seen him in that mood before. He was never that way with me, but I'd seen him suddenly turn on people, like a teased lion who's had enough. I remember the night Charlie was killed, Mark grabbing up the shotgun and firing away. I don't think I could have done that, even if I had known Charlie was dead at the time. "I don't like being analyzed, baby," Mark said, "so don't." I couldn't tell him to lay off, because he had a point. Kathy did like to turn everyone inside out and look at him. It didn't bother me, but I could see where it might bug some people. "I'm sorry," Kathy said, even though she wasn't. I had to say something, so I said, "Let's get a hamburger." We turned into a big drive-in called Jay's, which was always crowded. It was a setup with a stall for each car and a little deal that had a menu and a button on it. You pushed the button and a voice came out of the deal and said, "Order, please," and you told the speaker what you wanted. In this case, it was 3 hamburgers, 1 steak sandwich, a cherry pineapple, 7-Up, and 3 Cokes. And about 10 minutes later, a chick appeared with the food. It was slightly spooky. The place was crawling with kids. It was mainly a Soch hangout. There used to be a drive-in on our side of town where the hoods went, but the dingo was bombed and had burned down, so we had started coming over here. Kids were driving through the parking area, looking at the kids who were sitting in their cars. It was the same thing that was going on in the street, only on a smaller scale. They had a cop stationed at the drive-in to prevent trouble. He was on a first-name basis with a lot of the kids there. He was a friendly, good-natured cop who didn't mind getting splattered by a water pistol now and then. I didn't much care for him, though, due to my feelings about cops in general. I began telling Kathy about the time the cops had beaten me up when I was 13. "You shouldn't have been running around drunk in the middle of the night," she said. "I never thought of it that way," I said. "Who would?" came Mark's voice from the back seat. I realized right then that whatever chance Mark and Kathy had ever had of becoming friends was gone. I had already sensed in Kathy the same hostility toward Mark that he had for her. That put me in a really great position. Hey, there's Terry Jones. I'm going over to see him, Mark said suddenly. He gave the cop a quick glance. You weren't supposed to get out of your car at the drive-in. They came up with this rule about a year ago because all the switching from car to car was causing fights. What was worse, cars were left empty in the stalls for hours at a time while the owners were running the ribbon in someone else's car. This doesn't make money for the drive-ins. Mark doesn't like me much, does he? Kathy said. Eminem looked at her, astonished. For the first time, I was sick of her honesty. You don't like him either, I said. Not used to having her honesty turned back on her, Kathy was silent for a minute. I guess we're fighting over you. Isn't that funny? A real riot, I said dryly. I looked across the street, watching some little 12 and 13-year-old teeny boppers make fools of themselves, smoking, trying to act cool, pushing each other, screaming and swearing so loud I could hear them. I had a sudden recollection of Mark and me at 12, smoking our heads off, clowning around, hoping someone, usually some little long-haired chick, would notice us and see how cool we were. All of a sudden, it seemed like I was 100 years old, or 30 at least. I wondered if, when I got to be 20, I would think how stupid I was at 16. When I remembered us, it didn't seem possible that we had looked as silly as these teeny boppers, but I guess we had. At least then, we weren't worried about looking silly. We were sure of ourselves, so sure we were the coolest things that hit town. Now, I wasn't so sure. That was strange, too. In the past, I thought in terms of we. Now I was thinking in terms of me. There sure isn't anything to do in this town, Kathy said, breaking in on my thoughts of the good old days. We could go to a movie, I said, even though I didn't have the money to go to the movies, or money to go bowling, or money to go out to dinner, or money to go to ride go-karts, or to go to the amusement park. No, I don't want to go to the movies. There's nothing to do in this town except drive up and down. That takes gas, Eminem said, and gas takes money, even though neither Kathy or me had mentioned money. Well, let's go drive up and down some more, I said, flipping on a switch on the magic dealie that signals the car hop to appear and pick up our tray. I was thinking about what Kathy had said. There was nothing to do except drive up and down on the ribbon, even though we had lived in a fairly large city. It wasn't New York, but for our part of the country, it was good size. All the adults in town screamed about the kids driving up and down, but what did they expect us to do? Sit and twiddle our thumbs like they probably did when they were young? No thanks. We drove up and down the ribbon again. It was getting hard to find a place to turn around. Usually the shopping center at the far end was good for a quick turnaround, but somehow the cops figured out that was against some law that had been gathering dust for years, so they sat in the shopping center lots giving out tickets. If a kid got a ticket, he immediately went around collecting money from friends and strangers. Usually he got at least a nickel or a dime from each person. I have never known anybody who took advantage of this custom by collecting money when he didn't really have a ticket. This would have been like squealing on someone you saw cheating, or refusing to lend or give or sell your senior theme to some promising junior. A block beyond the shopping center, under the bypass, the ribbon ended as suddenly as it began, at a movie theater 2 miles back. Abrupt and unexplainable, there was another shopping center beyond the bypass, but for some reason it was not considered part of the ribbon, so it wasn't full of cops. We turned around there to head back, which is against the unwritten rules of the ribbon, but I didn't feel like messing around, sitting in the left turn lane for half an hour waiting to turn. Drive by the hot dog stand, Eminem said, so I pulled in to drive through the parking lot, which is filled with kids sitting on their cars. We got tied up in a long line of cars driving through the hot dog stand lot. Eminem suddenly got out of the car. I got some friends around here, Eminem said. He should have. At least 3/4 of the guys out there had hair to their shoulders. Well, when can we pick you up? Not ever. I'm not going home, Eminem said, and walked off toward a group of kids sitting on a station wagon. There were cars honking behind me, so I had to drive on, even though Kathy was yelling, "Stop! We just can't let him walk off like this." "I'll drive back through," I said, trying to hush her up, because I don't like hysterical chicks. She calmed down right away. That little mess. Wait till I get a hold of him. She didn't, though. When I came back through, he was gone, and nobody seemed to know where. I parked the car, and Kathy and me ran around asking different kids. We drove up and down the ribbon until 1 o'clock in the morning looking for him. I found Mark sitting on Terry's car. Terry had gone somewhere with a couple of girls. We picked him up and drove home in silence. Kathy was crying without making any noise, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't annoyed by a girl for crying. Instead, I felt really bad. It was the first time I'd ever felt bad for anyone except Mark.